The island looked like a skull the moment we crested the last swell, a black silhouette rising from the sea with empty eye sockets carved into mist. That first sight is the image that will never leave me. Bone in the shape of a hill, a single bare tree like a crooked tooth on its crown. I remember thinking, half joking, that the sea itself had spat out a grave. I should have turned the boat around. I did not. My name is not important. What matters is why I stayed. I came to film, to prove something to myself, that strange places can be cataloged, labeled, explained. I told myself this as the ferry pulled me and my camera bag closer, as the hull rasped against the black rock and spray stung my eyes. The villagers warned us on the pier in the way people warn against storms, not as myth but as weather, practical, unavoidable. They spoke in short, hushed phrases and wouldn't meet my eyes. Don't go at dusk, they told us. Leave before the fog comes. I laughed then to hide the way their silence sat in my ribs like a stone. The air changed as soon as my boots hit the island's shore. Salt and old iron, as if something had been buried and left to rust beneath the earth. The sound of the ocean softened, not because the water was quieter, but because the island swallowed noise like a mouth. Even the gulls were gone. Where birds should have been, there was only an oppressive stillness that felt like the pause before a word you hope won't be said aloud. At first, the oddities were small and easy to file away. My compass spun like a toy, refusing north. My watch lost minutes the way a pocket leaks coins. Shadows gathered wrong, straight lines that bent where no cliff should bend, a darkness clinging to the lower rocks even when the sun climbed. There was a taste on the air, metallic and sweet, that made the back of my tongue feel raw. When I set up the camera on the first cliff, framing the skull's toothy ridge, the feed on the small monitor flickered once, twice, and for a single frame the image was not the island at all, but a pale oval, like an eye, filled with something moving inside. That should have been enough. The logical person in me would have packed and left. But there is a voice that speaks when curiosity overrules common sense. I listened. I walked inland, following a narrow path that hugged the jawline of the island. Underfoot, the rock gave with a faint sound of bones rubbing together. The wind died as I climbed, and in that sudden silence I heard it. A whisper from the hollow side of the hill, soft and almost patient, as if the island were clearing its throat to welcome me. I thought the island wanted to be seen. I was wrong. It wanted to be answered. The path narrowed into a crooked gorge that ran like a seam through the skull's cheek. The walls were scored with scratches, long and deliberate, as if someone had tried to carve letters and given up halfway. Between those markings, I found objects. A child's shoe, half buried, a rusted compass face with no glass, a photograph curled by moisture. The photo showed 3 figures at the cliff, not smiling, not posing. They stood like trophies, heads tilted, faces blurred by wind or time. My stomach dropped because on the back of the photo, written in a shaky hand, was a date and my own name. I laughed then, too loudly, a sound that vanished into the stone. The camera recorded everything. Later, when I watched the footage, the laugh sounded thin and wrong, stretched at the edges as if someone had pulled it through water. The monitor showed other things I was sure I hadn't seen, small movements at the periphery, the quick blink of something in the shadow, and always that whisper, threaded through the audio like static. The whisper learned my cadence. It started answering me before I'd finished a sentence. By noon, the sun had been swallowed by a slow, mildew fog that rolled over the island like cloth. My breath came thick. The physical world began to betray me. The cliff I'd measured in the morning was somehow closer to the beach when I looked back. A stone I stepped over now lay where my foot had been. I found footprints in sand that should not have been there. Prints too small, too narrow, running toward the skull's mouth and vanishing into the black like a throat swallowing light. I kept the camera between my hands like a rosary. I told myself it would prove everything, the island's tricks, my creeping fear, but at night, the footage rebelled. Hours I remembered spending wandering appeared compressed into seconds on playback. Other moments expanded and looped, showing me crouched, eyes wide, mouthing a word I could not recall saying. Once, the screen showed me from behind, walking toward the mouth of the skull. And then, after a blink, there was a second me in the frame, standing motionless, and looking straight at the camera with a face I did not recognize and yet could not stop knowing. The whisper became names. Not names of people I knew, but names in a language that cut through my bones like wind through an old house. They were kind at first, coaxing. They told me where to look, which stones to turn, which hollow held the next photograph. But kindness curdled. They began to imitate voices I'd loved, then switch, like a radio skipping channels. I heard my sister in the hiss and my father in a low, exhausted rumble begging me to leave. I obeyed those pleas once for a heartbeat and tried to run, then stopped because the island folded around my feet, and when I looked down there were more prints beside mine, closer and fresher, converging on the same dark mouth. I climbed to the Skull's Eye at dusk because some part of me wanted to meet what watched. From the rim, I saw the ocean like a black skin knitting itself into waves. Below, in the cavity of the skull, something moved that was not stone. It was slow. It had texture. It had teeth. And when it turned, it did not look outward. It looked inward toward the island, toward me, and smiled. I heard, clear as a struck bell, the whisper form the last thing I wanted to hear. My name, spoken like a promise. When the mouth of the skull breathed, it smelled like old paper and salt and the faint, unmistakable sweetness of decay. I should have left when the whisper first said my name. I did not. Curiosity had become its own, darker appetite, a thing that fed on the quick, hot scraps of my bravery. The rim gave way beneath my boots, not all at once, but like an acknowledgement. The island did not shove me so much as allow me to choose the right moment to fall. Inside was a hollowness that held sound like a held breath. My lamp painted the walls in trembling circles and revealed grooves and nails and something that made my chest stop. Small, square frames nailed into rock, rows of photographs pressed behind glass fogged with salt. Faces filled them, not smiling. Faces softened at the edges as though they had been stared at until their edges smudged. I thumbed one free with hands that shook. The photo was of the cliff, of the skull from the shore, and in the foreground, impossibly, was me, standing exactly where I stood now, looking at the camera. The real camera, not the one on the monitor, slipped from my shoulder and hit the dirt with a sound like a gunshot. When I crawled forward to pick it up, the screen showed what it always showed in the worst moments, a looped, impossible playback. There I was, on the screen, walking into the skull's mouth, and then there was another me in the same frame, frozen, staring directly into the lens with eyes that belonged to someone who had watched a long time. My breath fogged the glass. My fingers left prints on the metal. The voice, my name, came again, softer, threaded through the bones of the island, and this time it sounded like a suggestion I had already agreed to before I knew the question. I tried to run then, to claw upward and out, but the walls shifted with the memory of feet long gone. When I stumbled, something cold brushed my cheek. Hair. Not my hair. When I turned, the light caught a face in the shadow that was at once unfamiliar and exact, as if a print had been pressed into clay and then fired into permanence. It mouthed my name without moving its lips. My voice answered from somewhere above me, on the rim, high and thin and already echoing in the photographs nailed to the rock. I thought of the villagers and their short warnings and of the single bare tree on the crown, like a crooked tooth. I thought of the photograph with my name on the back. I thought of every small, stupid choice that had led me here. The island wanted something simple, to be recognized, to be returned what it had once been promised. It was not hungry for my body so much as for my recognition, my consent to be part of its skin. I raised the camera because I always had. I set it to record because habit is an easy prayer. The shutter clicked, the lamp guttered. The last thing I remember is the way my own eyes looked back at me from the framed photograph, patient and finished, like a sentence that had already been written. It wears my face.
Subscribe to Horror Stories.